Hello. In the last video, we got the Splunk instances installed with Splunk, and something I did forget at the very end, I just realized, is I didn't set up boot start on the rest of the instances. So I'm going to do that real quick. So I'm going to exit this. I'll close out of all of these because I think one of them is errored out. Let me execute all sessions real quick, and this is where multi-exec ends up shining. So we'll do sudo su escalate to root. We already did it on the management host, the cluster manager, but that's fine. So we'll do op splunk bin splunk enable boot start dash user splunk, enter. So now Splunk should boot start, Splunk should start up on boot. I'll switch to Splunk on all these instances. I don't know if we'll actually need it for now. So in this video, we're going to set up the deployment client, deployment server relationship. So not all of these hosts are actually going to get their configs from the same spot. So we have our management host here, which is doing quadruple duty. It's going to be responsible for providing configs for the indexer cluster as a cluster manager, as well as a deployment server, which is going to manage any of our deployment clients. So that would be like the workstations and servers and all that kind of stuff in our environment. For us, it's just this one heavy forwarder that we'll have. And we're also going to set it up to do our search head as well. Typically, if you have a search head cluster, you would have a deployer be the one that pushes out configs to it. But for this instance, we're just going to set it up to call back to the deployment server aspect of this management instance to pull its configs. So I'm going to shade these differently and also enable dark mode so it's not flashbanging us every single time we go in here. And I'll set this to blue. So the blue is going to be the cluster manager relationship. The green is going to be the deployment server relationship because they get their configs from two different places. So for the deployment server, it gets it from the deployment apps directory. Here, let me type this out, set it to medium. So for cluster manager, there's a few different variations of the names, but it's going to be manager apps. Manager apps. I don't know if there is a dash. That's like a does Stanley have a mustache type question. Is there a dash? Etsy apps. Oh, Etsy manager apps. It used to be called master apps. So manager apps, there is a dash. So yeah, for a cluster manager, the apps were provided via the manager apps directory. For the deployment server, the apps are provided via the deployment apps directory, right? But both of those live on this same instance here. So in this video, we're just going to focus on deployment apps, which is the green part. And actually, let me split this out real quick and make that blue, so it's a little more easier to understand maybe. Yeah, whatever. I'll group that together. Cool. So let's do that. But before we do that, there's going to be a couple things we address in another video. One is going to be IO wait. I'll explain it, address it later once we have the deployment server and the cluster manager set up. Next thing is this KV store error that we saw earlier. That was actually due to a Proxmox config. So I had to come in here, go to processes, click edit, and set the type to, I think Sandy Bridge. Yeah, Sandy Bridge. Let me make a note of that as well. And do a reboot of that instance. So I'm going to go through real quick, set these all up, and it's going to be a good chance to check if the boot start works. So I will be right back. All right. So I just went through and did that for all of them. I'm going to right click up here and click close all tabs. And oh, that closes out MOBA. So let me restart that and I'll execute all. And let's do a multi-exec sudo su. Oh, looks like the others are still starting maybe. Okay, there we go. It was just waiting on the connection. Cool. So we've escalated to root. We'll switch to Splunk. We'll do Control R, status. Since we've already run that, it's in our history. Click enter. And we have Splunk running on all of the instances. So we know that the boot start is working fine. Cool. So now we need to start setting up these connections. So we'll start with the search head and the heavy forwarder. We're going to hook those up to the deployment server first. So let's go to the search head, log in, and crap, what did I say? The heavy forwarder. Search head and the heavy forwarder. So let's go here, go to the heavy forwarder, log into both of them. And if we set up the deployment server, it'll just let us push out configs a lot easier. And we're just gonna set up the config just directly on here. So let's go to manage apps. I'm gonna install Config Explorer on this. Actually, let's do it from the back end instead of installing Config Explorer on both of these separately. So let's go. We're going to exit multi-exec. We'll just go to our search head to begin with. And let's go into ops Splunk etc apps. This directory is where all of the apps live for Splunk. So you'll see there's a bunch of apps that already exist, and we can create our custom ones on here as well. So in Splunk, we'll discuss this later, like precedents and creating apps and all that kind of stuff in the app structure. So for now, if you're not comfortable with it, I would just kind of follow along, maybe look into some of these apps just inside of them, like in the, what am I typing? CD search. See, you can look at the app structure, maybe go into the default, look at the configs, all that kind of stuff. So we'll go into that later. But here I'm gonna make a app called BC for Barely Late. You just want some kind of naming convention, and usually for Splunk environments it'll be like the org at the beginning. So I'll do BC underscore and then what it is and then what it applies to. So you could do inputs underscore win for the Windows inputs, or do inputs underscore Linux, or whatever. Like, it just stick with some kind of naming convention that makes sense to you. I'll probably switch around some of these main naming conventions, but for this I'm going to do BC underscore deployment client all. So it's going to be the deployment client config for everyone. So there is some kind of not questions, but some strategy to the way that you want to do deployments, especially putting deploymentclient.conf files in a certain app structure. I'll probably go through that in a different video. So to not overcomplicate it here, I'm just going to create this app. We'll go into the app and we'll need to create a local directory. So we'll mkdir local, and we'll go in and also create in here a metadata directory that will prevent some issues later on I'll talk about. So in the local directory, we'll vim a app.conf, and you'll want to put something in here, and I'll just say deployment client config and save that, and that's it. In the metadata directory, it's a little bit more, let me pull up my example. It's a little different looking. We'll need to create a Vim. We'll call it local.meta. There's also a default.meta. We'll just call it local.meta, and paste this in. And all these configs, I'll try to put it in a Git repo that'll be in the description, just so if you want to just copy and paste it, it's in there, and other people can, comment or suggest changes and all that. So all this means is this the square brackets is a stanza, and this is like a catch-all stanza, and saying that everyone can read any config, any knowledge object coming out of here, and admin can write to it, and it's going to export it system-wide, so globally. So we'll probably go more in depth with this in other videos, but this is just a metadata file you have to have in here, and this metadata file contains, this is permission information, and if you don't have permission information, or at least have this catch-all in there, you may run into issues where your configs aren't actually applying correctly. So we have the local.meta in the metadata file or directory to do our permission. So in local, we have an app.conf, which lets Splunk know, hey, this is an app. And now we need to create the deployment client.conf. So to create this, what we'll want to do is go to Splunk conf deployment client, and we'll see the docs.splunk.com site. A really cool trick in here is if you go up to the version, so you can choose whatever version applies to you. If you always want the latest version, you can just double click and type in latest. It'll give you the latest version. And if you look here, here's all the config files. If we go to app.conf, you'll see the only part that really changes is this end app. So it's config name conf, right, without the period there. So what we can do is go in, copy this URL. If you're on Chrome, I know Firefox has a similar thing. I'm sure other browsers have it as well. But in Chrome, we'll go to settings, or settings, and then search engine, manage search engines, and we'll scroll through here to this site search section. You'll probably have some in here if you've been using the browser for a little while, but we'll click add, and we'll name it Splunk conf search. This shortcut that I like to use is conf, and then paste it in with that latest URL, and we're going to replace the config name with a %s, which is a variable, like a placeholder. And now, anytime we want to get to a config file, instead of having to Google it, we'll just do Control-T to create a new tab, type in conf, and either click here or just click space and just type in the name of the config. So let's say we want app.conf. If we type in app and click enter, it'll put the string app into the URL for you, and it takes you straight there. And let's say we want to do it the same with Linux. Control-T to open up a new window, conf space inputs, or not Linux inputs. Enter, it takes us to the input conf spec file and the documentation for it. So it's super useful in a lot of other situations other than Splunk, but Splunk Docs is a really nice spot to use that in. So for deployment client, we're here getting inspiration for how we want to set up the config. You can do it via the GUI. So we'll do it via the GUI on the heavy forwarder, and then we'll do it via the backend on the search head just to see the differences. But typically when we create an app, or when we create a config where we want to connect the like an instance to another, like do the deployment client configuration or set something up in a config, we want to typically put it in an app, and it's easier to do it from the back end or using Config Explorer after you get a little bit of repetition with it. And the only way to get repetition with it is just to do that instead of relying on the GUI. But whatever floats your boat is really fine. And in the second method, I'll show you how to use the GUI, but then still get the advantage of having it in its own app. And some of this stuff is probably not going to make sense the first time you go through it anyway. So may take some repetition. So here we're trying to get inspiration for the deployment client.conf. It's a spec file, so we can go through here and read through all the different configs. We really don't care about most of these configs. This is where doing it from the GUI is helpful, because we don't need to remember all the configs, what the parameters are, what the standard names are. But here we do have an example section for pretty much all of these configs. So we go down to the example section and we can see what a standard deployment looks like. For the most part, yours is most likely going to be look like a standard deployment. But if you need to make any changes, we still have the specs up here to customize it however you want. So for us, this is what our setup is going to look like. We have a fairly straightforward deployment server config. So we're just going to copy this example. We'll go back over to the CLI now. All right, so in the CLI here, we're going to just paste in, let me go to insert mode and paste in what we have and make the changes we need to make. So really the only thing we need to make changes, what we need to change here is the host name. So for us, the deployment server is on the cluster manager, which is our management host. So I'll do CM and then put the domain name in and escape and make sure that this looks good. So it's just the host name and the port. That's pretty much it. So let's go back here. https://hostname:/port 8089 is the management port. That's the default port, and it will be HTTPS, even though our web is currently still HTTP with no SSL. So we'll go back here. Let's save that, and we're gonna restart. But before we restart, we want to go over to our cluster manager, and what we're watching for is this forwarder management page. And currently this has nothing in here. This is a very new interface that I haven't really used all that much. That just takes you to the docs, but we're watching for forwarders to show up in here. Right now it shows up 0. So we'll go back here and we're gonna do a restart. Again, Control R, restart, click enter. And the nice part about restarting from the CLI is you can see when the web GUI comes back up. So I'll be right back. All right, so now we are waiting for the web GUI to pop back. And we are back. So to check if this is working, we're gonna monitor the Splunk.log file. So to do that, I'll just less it for now because it's probably making that connection at the moment. So we'll do opsplunk var, which is where the log files live. So var log splunk d.log. And then I'll do shift enter to get to the bottom. And what we're looking for is anything talking about deployment or DC. So I'll do question mark to search back up and do capital DC enter. And there it is. So we have handshake, it's not connected right here. So it is having trouble connecting. We will give it a second. There we go. So now DC handshake, and it says handshake done. DC here is deployment client, by the way, and you'll probably see another one, DS, but I think we'll only see that on the cluster manager, which is our deployment server. So now, if we minimize that, here on the deployment server, we're gonna reload this page, give this a second to pop up, but we should see our forwarder show up in here as a new agent. So we'll give this a second, I'll be right back. All right, there we go. So we have the client pop up here. I don't know what's giving me a GUID for the name here, but we have the forwarder showing up. We can view details. We have some information here, including the host name. So the search head is configured now. All right, so I was going to show you how to do the deployment client from the GUI. I've never actually done deployment client configs from the GUI, and I just realized there isn't a way to do it from the GUI. So instead, I'm going to show you what I was talking about, but just know that you can't attach, or it doesn't seem like there is a way to attach a deployment client as a client to a deployment server from the GUI. So we're going to have to do it from the backend anyway. But what I was showcasing is when you go into settings, and a lot of the configs are when you change the config or like a setting, it gets saved in the context of the app. So the app that I'm in right now, which is the app that you would go into by default after you log in, is the launcher app. And if I go into settings and I go to searches, reports, and alerts, you'll see it's within the launcher app's context. Same thing with if I go into search and then go in, it's still within the search app's context. So being in the search app's context, if I go to server settings and change, so this is where I was going to edit it, but I just realized that you can't actually edit the deployment server config from the GUI here. But a lot of these configs, whenever you go in and change a config, like go into general settings, and if I were to change something here, some of these configs won't actually save into the system local directory. It'll save into the context of the search app. So if you make a change and you're looking for that change and you don't see it in the system local directory, it's probably because it went into the context of the app and it's in search local. Not every config is like that, but a lot of them are, and that information will likely come into use later on when you're doing some of the administrative stuff from the front end. So we're just going to follow the same steps here that we did on the search head. And I'm already in the app here, so I'm going to cat the deployment apps and copy this over. So you could use some kind of like automation tool that you have to do this for you. But I'll go over to ops Splunk etc apps and pretty much make the same app here, mkdir-p to make multiple directories, bc deployment client all /local, and I think that's spelled exactly the same way. I'll vim and app.conf, and in here I'll put dc config. I'll vim the deployment client.conf, paste it in, and this is a config from the other one. And just to, have that best practice going, I'll do mkdir metadata, and within the metadata app, I'm going to create the local.meta. And this config would probably work without the local.meta, but I'm just going to put it in there just to stay consistent. Cool. Put that in, save that. And something we can do just to check the syntax of the configs is a btool check. So we can run opt splunk bin splunk space btool space check. We'll have a separate video talking about btool, but it's a way to check and validate configs that are in the file system. And btool check will run through the configs and make sure there's no like blatant syntax issues or unexpected values or something like that. So it didn't see anything. So I'm going to go ahead and restart. So I'll be right back once this is closer to being finished restarting. All right, so this is restarting, and we'll use a different method to check the this connection to the deployment server. So we'll do okay. I don't know what I just recorded, and I just realized I was on pause this whole time. So let me re-explain what happened. And so here we went through and wrote all the configs in, and then I did a tail F on the splunkd.log for the string DC in caps. And we pretty much just waited to see when that handshake successful or handshake done message came through. So it took 3 retries or whatever, and the handshake success came through. And now we are waiting on the forwarder management GUI on the cluster manager, which is also our deployment server, for the new host to come in. And there we go. Now we have both of the hosts in, the search head and the heavy forwarder. So that's it. That's really the only host that we need to hook up to our deployment server. the search head and the heavy forwarder, so we can push out configs to it. And these are going to be set up with the cluster manager. So in the next video, we'll go through pushing out like apps to the search heads or any of your deployment clients. And we'll push out Config Explorer in the next video to show as an example. So see you guys next time. Bye-bye.